The other thing I wanted just to close on was the Nigel Farage debanking scandal, which is something which has popped up in Britain recently. And you may not be familiar with it if you live outside of perfidious Albion, but I wanted to highlight it because it's very much something which is a sign of things to come. Now, if you're familiar with the history of the British banking system and its usage against the trade union movement, this isn't anything particularly new, though, of course, now it's much easier to do to people en masse. Back in the 1980s, the National Union of Mine Workers had its bank accounts severely restricted. They attempted to confiscate the money that people had sent to the NUM when it was out on strike for a year. They attempted to do what they call a sequestration of assets, stop them using the banking system. They ended up having to drive briefcases full of cash around to make sure the union's operating expenses got met. So this is something that they've always had the power to do. Only now with cash being used less and less, and with the banking system more digitized, it's easier to essentially debank somebody. And if you're not familiar with what's gone on, Nigel Farage, most of you will probably know of him. He's the guy who is associated most heavily with the Brexit vote. He led the UK Independence Party, this pro-Brexit, essentially sort of an odd coalition of like old school Tories, libertarians, various sort of dissident right-wing sorts in Britain who wanted to stage a vote in order to campaign for withdrawal from the EU. And after years, over 20 years of campaigning for this, they finally got to the point where they were strong enough to provoke a split, or looking like they were going to provoke a split in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, prompting the opportunistic Prime Minister David Cameron to overpromise. He promised a referendum if these guys stayed in the party and didn't defect to UKIP just before the 2015 election. And then he delivered on that referendum and lost because people used it as an opportunity to vote against the system. And ever since then, there's been a lot of manoeuvres by various actors who are linked to the British deep state to try and nail Farage for some criminal activity or another. Again, friend of the show, Kit Clarenberg, has reported on this extensively. The attempt by The Guardian and Carol Cadwallader, who's linked to the Integrity Initiative, to smear Farage, to claim that he was a Russian asset, to claim that him and Aaron Banks, this admittedly shady character who's one of the bankrollers of UKIP, to claim that they were on the payroll of the Russians, which wasn't true. And Cadwallader ended up losing that case. But the allegations of Russian involvement, of foreign interference in Brexit, just like in the United States with Trump, is a similar thing that went on in both cases. Like the liberals, the liberal end of the bourgeoisie basically went completely nuts and decided they were going to move heaven and earth to remove these negative impacts as they saw it. Corbyn, slightly different matter, and I've started talking about him. I'll be here all day. But with Farage, this has concluded recently with this debanking scandal, which he claimed in a Twitter video released a couple of weeks back that he'd had his accounts removed from Coutts, which is this bank that provides services to the ultra-rich. I think it's ultimately owned by the NatWest Group. And he claimed that this had been done under an EU regulation about him being a politically exposed person, which relates or seems to relate to the allegations that he was in bed with the Russians. And first of all, the bank management denied it, and then the owner, the company that owns Coutts, NatWest Group, denied it. But then, of course, Farage, decent lawyers on the case, and managed to unearth a lot of documents where it was confirmed that he'd essentially been denied an account, or he had his account closed by Coutts for specifically political reasons, mentioning his support for Brexit, his association with Trump, and a couple of other things as well. And this was now fairly well established and documented that the bank had been lying, and it was political reasons as to why they'd done this. Of course, the Tories, the Conservative Party government, screamed that this was terrible and they were going to do something about it. Whether they do or not, we should keep track of that. But the reaction that's been most interesting has, of course, been the moronic British left. And when I don't even need to add the word moronic anymore. When I say British left, or indeed American left, you can just assume moronic is just added into the description automatically, because they've been like celebrating it and laughing about it. And of course, what these clowns don't realize is that if they'll do this to Farage, who's like a supporter of British imperialism, he just wants it to be run in the more traditional sense of the term, not this ghastly collaboration with the Europeans. If they'll do it to him, who's a very establishment guy, who's got some very powerful friends, so if they'll do it to a guy like that who does have millions in the bank, or did do, who does have powerful friends, who does have access to a team of top-rate lawyers, well, what the hell are they going to do to, shall we say, a group of trade unionists who go on an unofficial strike, who are trying to keep their heads above water by crowdfunding themselves if their unions abandon them? Or even take it one step up. What if they decide to debank a trade union again? I mean, it took a lot of effort for the National Union of Mine Workers back in 84 to 85 to keep themselves running on cash. It'll be a lot more difficult these days, given how many places don't take cash, given how many people rely upon purely digital transactions. If you think that them being able to deny banking services to this guy because you have some fucking allergic reaction to Brexit, or you think that Nigel Farage is some sort of fascist, which he's not, by the way, he's basically an old English libertarian Tory. If you think that this is a good thing, this is clownish behaviour, because in the period we're moving into, where class struggle is going to intensify, where we might get more wildcat strikes that are abandoned by the union leadership, where we need to crowdfund people's strike funds or legal defence funds or any of that. Now they've established that they can do this. Admittedly, they've had to backtrack on Farage because he has enough powerful friends and media clout to make them back down. But how many of us are going to be able to make them back down when we're in a more severe class war situation, where they suddenly turn around and deny you banking services, plunging many people who might be involved in a strike or a difficult political struggle into an immediate crisis? Have any of these idiots celebrating the debanking of Farage thought about this for more than 5 seconds, for more than the visceral, silly thrill of giggling at the bad man? Who, by the way, like, as far as villains go, I mean, who's worse, Nigel Farage or Tony Blair? You know, Nigel Farage, who says a few naughty things about immigrants, or Tony Blair, who is responsible for the killing of God knows how many millions? And yet, of course, the moronic British left in the 2000s was telling you to vote for Tony Blair's Labour Party to stop fascism, as they will do today as well. So bear that in mind as well. So this is another case where the left has managed to, quite frankly, get all the wrong conclusions yet again. And again, Zuleika has pointed out in the chat that they were doing this to independent journalists last year. Another thing I should have mentioned is that they tried this out on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks over a decade ago, when suddenly PayPal and the other major financial organizations, PayPal, by the way, founded by Elon Musk, suddenly withdrew services from WikiLeaks under pressure from the American government. So just because this is now happening to Farage, who attracts the ire of the British left, because the British left just follows the bourgeois liberals in their moral panics, this is going to happen to independent journalists, it's going to happen to trade unionists, it's going to happen to communists. And, well, if you don't want it to happen to you, well, you better have a pretty solid plan of action for when they do deny you banking services, and basically and they won't even give you the time, if things have really heated up, to get your money out of there. They'll just take it off you. And they'll claim that they've taken it off you because you're suspected of terrorist activities, which, by the way, they can do. They can take your assets off you if they suspect you of terrorism. Under the powers of the Terrorism Acts that they've passed quite a few of over the last 20 years, they can do almost anything to you if they can claim you're a terrorist. They can take your children away from you. They can get you fired from your job. They can throw you in prison without charge. All of that is stuff that they've been establishing that they can do legally for many, many years now. And of course, every single time this happened, you get some moron saying, well, if you don't done nothing wrong, There's nothing to fear. Or no, they're just doing it to bad people. Well, look where we are now. On the verge of a catastrophic economic crisis, on the verge of outbursts of new political struggles, and the moronic left is still cheering this on. It's a warning for all of us of the kind of treatment that they've got in store for us as time goes on.